Hi, my name's John Drain, and I want to share with you today a story about an encounter with what I think must have been angels that I had maybe some 20 plus years ago, but which I'm still thinking about today. So come with me to a conference. I've spent much of my life in conferences between church and the academy, so it's my natural habitat in many respects. Many of them are dead boring, and this one was no exception. And so I found myself in one of the major cities in Southeast Asia, sitting in a conference hall and thinking, there has to be more to life than this. Not for the first time. There has to be more to life in this city that I find myself in. And I remember thinking quite specifically, John, you haven't come halfway across the world just to sit in a conference and listen to people talking about stuff that you could actually have stayed at home. And so I started asking myself and inquiring with other people, what else is there in this city that might interest me? And one of the things that lots of people said was, well, there are, I think it was about 20,000 people at the time living on a rubbish tip. And people like you, who in the grand scheme of things are relatively well off, white Western people, you need to experience this so that you can go back and tell your people about the poverty and the injustice that exists in so many parts of the world. I was immediately up for this, and so with 3 or 4 others who I recruited, we got together and rented somebody who would drive us to the location of this rubbish tip community. And so I remember arriving there, very clear memory in my mind, on a very dark, middle of a thunderstorm kind of afternoon. And we arrived at this place, which was absolutely buzzing, as you can imagine, with tens of thousands of people, mostly young people, because the life expectancy in such a place wasn't very high. And we arrived, and the driver who'd taken us there, a local taxi owner, I guess, opened the doors and nobody moved. Not surprising, because the smell and the sight and just the general environment was really quite overpowering. And I could see that we were going to sit there and potentially just be driven back after 10 minutes. And so I thought again, John, you haven't come halfway across the world just to sit in a car and look at people eking out a living on a rubbish tip. You've got to get out here and feel it and smell it and experience it for yourself. And so I did. And I remember very clearly walking probably, I don't know, 50, 60, maybe a bit more meters out onto this rubbish, which was probably 7 or 8 meters deep beneath my feet, at least, maybe more. All around was discarded food, cans, paper, bottles, dead dogs and cats here and there, and thousands of people existing on this place. And I remember very clearly just stopping in my tracks and taking it all in, and literally with the tears streaming down my cheeks, thinking, what is going on here? What has the world come to that people need to live like this? And just as I'm contemplating all that, suddenly, apparently out of nowhere, 3 young children came up, and I've always assumed they saw my relative distress because they came and put their arms around me in a circle as if to comfort me. It was quite surprising in that environment because there was no shortage of other young children wanting to sell t-shirts and trinkets, or indeed stuff that they had excavated from the rubbish itself. But these 3 were not selling anything. They were not saying anything. They had nothing they wanted me to give them, but they were giving me their love. And then, just as I'm standing there, the one directly in front of me suddenly became illuminated, shall we say. Well, actually was transformed, became a different person. A bright light And then, as if to say, well, in the midst of this darkness, there is a light that is shining here. From my Christian perspective, I internalize that as God saying, well, yes, this is a terrible place, but don't forget that I'm still here. And then, just as I'm processing this, in a very inadequate way, of course, in the spur of the moment, as quickly as these 3 children had come, they disappeared from sight. And I made my way back to the others in the car. I don't know what was going on in my head at that time as I walked back. Probably not what I'm thinking of now, because I'm thinking to myself, well, at that point in my life, if you'd asked me, do you believe in angels? I'd have probably, well, my answer would have depended on who you were who was asking the question. I'd probably have fudged a reply, because I wouldn't have wanted to say, no, I don't believe in angels. But to be honest, I don't think I really did. And so I get back to the car, and I suppose the natural thing would have been, in my mindset at that point in time, to rationalize all this and say, well, yes, you were upset. The environment, the smell, the sights, all those things have impacted you. So it's no surprise that you needed to see something, a bright light in that context. Except the people, the others who'd gone with me, one of them said, well, asked a question, what happened out there, John? And somebody else said, as I recall, it's a bit like Moses going up to the mountain. Now that's a story in the Hebrew scriptures of Moses going up to the mountain, having a divine encounter and coming back down again, and his face was shining from the light of God. I guess I'd have been able to dismiss this experience had it not been for the fact that somebody said that. John, you're shining. What was that light out there? And I'm almost surprised that 20 plus years later, whenever I meet some of those people who were in that car on that day, they always mention that occasion and that experience. And some of them say they really wished that they'd stepped out of the car on that occasion. So I don't know what you'll make of that, but for me, that convinced me that there is more to life than what we can see and touch and handle. It'll not always be angels, but for me, I would say, yes, that was the one occasion when angels came to me and ministered to me in my distress. And it certainly is the case that my life, my thinking, my worldview, the way I've looked at my own spirituality has never been the same from that day forward. So I wonder what you're going to make of that.